I've interviewed 200 ambitious dads, right, around the challenges, the needs, the gaps, the hopes that they have. And I definitely hear a very distinct vocabulary, a distinct set of fears, a distinct set of everything in comparison to the moms.
Like it or not, our society places different expectations on moms and dads. For parenting to really be a team sport, it's vital for parents to really see each other and learn to talk productively about what they need from each other.
I think what our challenge is what the kids need most is where women have been better conditioned than us, which is we don't try to solution everything, right? That we just listen. We fail at that horribly.
We're breaking all this down with Jeff Hittner, leadership coach and host of the Ambitious Dads podcast.
My name's Randy Rubenstein, and welcome to the Mastermind Parenting Podcast. At Mastermind Parenting, we're on a mission to support strong-willed kids and the families that love them. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast this week. I'm back with Jeff Hittner, and we are ready to dig in and have a good conversation, an organic conversation. We were just talking before we started recording, and I want to feature Jeff sort of on a regular basis here on the podcast because I've been looking for a resource for dads for years. And so that's what we're doing this week. So thanks for being back. I'm excited to talk to you.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to lend my voice to, the moms that you have listening and also some of the dads and also let them know that I also have a podcast specifically for dads called the Ambitious Dads Podcast. Please check that out as well. And I think what I'm most excited about, Randy, as we were just talking about it before we hit record, is just being able to talk about different topics and talk a little bit about how the father or male is interpreting like the challenge or the situation versus the mom. I can't speak for all dads by any means, but I've interviewed 200 ambitious dads, right, around the challenges, the needs, the gaps, the hopes that they have. And I definitely hear a very distinct vocabulary, a distinct set of fears, a distinct set of everything in comparison to the moms. And I think it's important that there's not one that's by any means more important than the other. They're different, and it would be amazing for us to share like our voices around how they differ and maybe what that could mean for how they co-parent better and how we talk about a whole host of things. So excited to talk about it.
Well, it reminds me, I think there's been several movies about, it's like it was like the movie He's Not That Into You was one that just, and it's the male perspective versus the female perspective. And I know I'm probably not being politically correct and I'm leaving out, this is all heteronormative. But again, anyone who listens to this podcast, I'm hoping is just going to give me a hall pass and some grace and know that I really am an inclusive person. So wherever you identify and in your relationship, a lot of times we just take on traditional roles.
Yeah.
I've even seen this in gay female couples, where one of the parents is more sort of the stereotypical masculine role. And, so anyway, I'm just going to say to all of the people listening, please give me a little grace when I talk about this. But yeah, we were talking about a scenario, and I was describing a dad who the mom is sort of the main pack leader in the family, and she's doing, all the invisible parenting jobs, or a lot of them, right? And the caring and the feeding and all of that, the coordinating and the permission slip signing and the school forms. And then mom was out of town for a couple of weeks on an international trip and like visiting her grandmother. And so with the rest of her family. So it was like she was across the world. Dad really stepped up to the plate. And something that we noticed was that when dad's really stepped into that pack leader role, which we knew he was super capable of, so many issues with the child sort of became non-issues. He like he was a he and it's not to say that mom wasn't a brilliant pack leader too, but dad brought something different. And like the child was just thriving. And we talked about how when mom came back, how do you guys integrate mom back into the equation, but you still stay in this role, right? Where you guys are doing this together because clearly your kid is thriving with you in this pack leader role. And I said, and, he got a little lazy and was just like, and sort of forgot to be in that role. And you very politely called me out on, I was defining it as lazy, and you were describing something totally different that I thought was really interesting. So if you'll share that, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, it was a couple of things, right? One, it's I think again, this is a generalization, but men, it's particularly in their households, it's pretty easy for them to look and say, you know what, like someone is already doing this in front of me, and therefore, like I'm going to step back because I don't want to compete on it, or it's already being done well. It's sort of the same thing that happens at work, right? So I'm also a leadership expert and an executive coach, and I see this. We call it, you have a manager of really high potential staff, and all of a sudden the staff aren't doing well, and it's because the leader is micromanaging or is over controlling different things, and then you see these same staff go report under someone else who is fantastic at letting go, fantastic at empowering, and they just start to excel. And so I don't want to blame, like, the person who isn't lifting up a finger, which isn't to say that the partner, and in this case the mom, doesn't have a right to be frustrated, but it's to say that there's a lot of dynamics going on here, right? And some of it is just innate, like, you know I remember for the longest time, my wife would just clean the kitchen, and she would do it extensively. And I would make the majority of dinners, but she would always clean the kitchen. And it would take longer because I'd make big messes when I cook. And I thought nothing of it because she cleaned and I cooked, and like that just seemed to be okay, right? But part of it was she wasn't offering space for me to also clean. She sort of went in and did it right away, and that's the same idea that, like, if you are telling me, right, that I would like you to play a role in this, or I would like you to lead this, that's very different than just expecting me to jump in while you're already doing the work, especially when we're all exhausted all the time from the 50 things we're doing. And that's also true at the office. So at work, we have to, what I tend to do is look at people's patterns, right? So usually there's a pattern underneath about this feeling, especially if letting go is hard, this feeling that, like, if I don't own something, I'm not as important as I want to feel. If I don't own something, it won't turn out as well. There's a bunch of sort of hidden assumptions and commitments that people have. And so it's not as easy necessarily as a behavior change, but it's a conversation that can start with, like, not coming from the place where you're both resenting each other, like this person is lazy and or this person won't give me a chance. It's coming from a place of, like, my perspective is X and my perspective is Y.
Do you think, though, I'm just thinking about in my own life. So if you have, I know I have a rejection thing deep inside of me. And
Mhm.
so anytime I think I'm going to get overly criticized or rejected in some way, or my efforts are going to be rejected, sometimes I'll just opt out. A lot of times I'll opt out. So me and my husband will have that dynamic, and we've been, I'll notice it in even the tiniest of ways where I call him the overfunctioner. Like he
Mm.
just does a lot of things really well. Okay, here's an example. Just the other night, we're watching, I got him into the Gilded Age. I'm rewatching the Gilded Age. He wasn't interested when I was first watching it, but now there's been enough people talking about it that he's like, okay, I'll watch it. So we're into the Gilded Age, and all of our kids had just left from Thanksgiving break. We have our house back to ourselves because we're in that stage of life. So I was like we were binging the Gilded Age. And he did some laundry and he comes and he puts it on the bed. And I was like, oh, I'll help him fold the laundry. And so I go and I start folding it. And then I see out of the corner of my eye, I look and I said, are you refolding the things that I just folded? And he started cracking up. And he's like, well, it's just, yeah, I like my underwear folded and I was like, okay, fine, forget it, you know? And so then he's happy to just do it. But there's lots of things where when I go and try and help, he's got his way, he's very specific about it. And so what that looks like is a lot of times I just don't even offer
Yeah.
because I feel rejected
Hmm.
when I don't fold his underwear the right way, right?
Yeah.
Or when I don't clean and so I'm wondering, is it male female, or is it really more just like understanding sort of the parts of all of us, that like the wounded parts, like not everyone brings the wounded rejected part maybe to the degree that I do. And so is it like understanding what your parts are, maybe your partners, like isn't this all self-awareness and awareness of others?
I think so. I don't think it has to be male, female. And I think that we all, again, especially since when we're in the middle of it with a bunch of kids, messy life, messy house, trying to do everything, balance a million things. If we're going to do something and the person that we're sharing our life with is going to redo it, like that's a quick lesson that I'm not going to bother anymore. So there can be a rejection piece in it, but I think there's also like, let's keep some emotional energy for something else if I'm not going to be appreciated for this. But the challenge is if we don't have a conversation, we're going to have resentment, right? And so simple conversations can be great. And you know, we all, in your husband's case, I mean, the fact that he needs his underwear folded in a very specific way, might not be the best use of his energy, right? And but that also takes like intentional change. We have a cleaning woman who comes once a week, and so what does that mean? I get the house messier and messier as we get closer to that day. My wife gets the house cleaner and cleaner, and for me, like that's completely illogical, right? And it's totally different approaches to the same goal. And so having a conversation is absolutely essential because otherwise we're really just sort of annoying each other.
Well, and as far as like, saying that the dad was being a little lazy, um, I think it's a little lazy to even call his behavior lazy when chances are there's even though, he was very capable and willing to be at the helm when she was out of town and he did an excellent job. If when she's back, she's going back to all the new ways that all the old ways that she typically does it, and he's not really, he doesn't maybe have the emotional bandwidth to say, well, when you were gone I did this or I handled this and he really responded well to it, or we didn't have the power struggles over this. um, why don't you let me handle this thing? Or what if we, watch how I do it, because he was really receptive. I think a lot of times it's, you might be worried that that's going to open up, you know Pandora's box of well, I did it for however many years without you here. And now you're saying that that wasn't, like maybe it's also trying to avoid a potential conflict. So you just opt out and don't even want to go there.
There's a ton of reasons. Maybe you don't want your partner to feel like hurt. Maybe they're very sensitive to the effort that they
Right.
put into parenting, right? There could be just a million different reasons not to speak up. And again, I think identifying, like, it's how you approach the conversation, right? So if the conversation is, we had an incredible couple of weeks together while you're away, do you want to hear about some of the interesting things that worked while we were gone, as opposed to saying, like, here's some things that work and therefore we should change it, right? Because we
Mm-hmm.
know that's not the best way to engage with anyone, right? It's just to say, from my experience, this is what happened. And then, in this example, the wife could be like, that's interesting. And then maybe she offers for him to continue with some of those things, as opposed to saying, I'm going to continue doing those things. And so, again, that's the balance that comes with knowing your partner and knowing how the best way to approach change, especially around parenting. And it's complicated because each couple is quite different in terms of their responsiveness.
Well, I think also, like, if I go back to my productive conversation framework and we look at that scenario, I think it's approaching the conversation from the other person's perspective. You're going to get way more buy-in. So if the husband were to say something like, and out of the moment, let's just say he's noticing that the morning is seeming crazy and the kid won't get dressed and he's being all picky about what he's having for breakfast, and it's just thing after thing after thing. Knowing timing is important. So when you're in one of those stressful moments, nobody's in their thinking brain. Nobody can hear you. It's very emotional. And so out of the moment, saying something like, when you were gone, it really was a reality check on how much you have handled that I
Yeah.
wasn't even aware of. Like, I mean, the first mornings when you were gone, what you experienced this morning, and I saw those little, and how you kind of helped him not to go full blown meltdown, and you were like, it went full blown meltdown, and I was like, oh my gosh, how does she do this? And but like by the end of the first week, what I realized was, oh, when I allow him to have a little more agency, when I give him more responsibilities, because, he's such a strong minded little guy, like he was rising to the occasion. And it was almost like the less I did, the more he was capable of doing.
So that's a
And
perfectly
yeah,
framed, by the way. That's like a perfectly framed conversation. But while you're saying it, I'm thinking in my, like, male dad brain. Honestly,
yeah,
I'm
yeah, I want
like,
to hear.
there is no way that's the first thing that bubbles up out of my mouth, because I am so proud of what I did for those 2 weeks while you're away. Like, instead of beginning the conversation with, I could see, like, all the effort you put in, the first thing I'm going to want to say is, you have no idea how well it went with, Jimmy, for the 2 weeks you were gone. We did this, we did this. I didn't have any problems. Like, there's this, like, grand desire to almost brag about how well some things went, and of course also talk about how poorly some other things went. But this also goes back to the other challenge that dads have, is they don't have a lot of other dads to talk to about this stuff. So that bragging piece, which would have been a lot more productive and useful in front of other men, instead gets put in front of your wife or the spouse, right? And as a result, like, you tell me, what's the mom going to feel when the first thing that comes out of my mouth is bragging?
Yeah, she's like, welcome to my world. You did it for 2 weeks. I've been
Yeah,
doing it for, 347 weeks, right?
exactly. And
So,
it was
yeah.
never the intention when it came out of his mouth to, like, undermine her effort. It was the excitement that he felt from that success. And again,
Well, I
herein
would push back
lies,
on that. I
oh,
would push back
please.
on that because the excitement he feels, to me, feels like a little bit of proving energy.
Mm.
Like, so it's, I need to prove to you that I can do this. I'm really wanting some pats on the back. I really need that. And to me, that feels like, yeah, if you're a kid, if you grew up with conditioning where everything was about being externally validated, if you got the grade, then you got the love and acceptance and pats on the back. If you didn't get the grade or you didn't get the achievement, then you're nothing, or love was withheld. Or people were really disappointed in you. It's like, I think so many of us were not raised with a growth mindset. We were raised with a fixed mindset. So to me, when all that, see, I can do it. I did it. Like, please celebrate me. It's a little graspy and it's a little provy. And it always causes the other person, whenever you sense that energy, whether it's from a spouse, whether it's from a friend, something about it doesn't pass the smell test and people are instantly defensive.
Yes. And what's also interesting is I'll tell you to what comes up for me when you say that is actually a different thing as a guy. It is that, through all of my research, one of the biggest things that popped up was how low our self confidence
Mm-hmm.
is as fathers, right? We have this huge desire. We identify first and foremost as fathers, but when we look at like our self confidence, only a third of dads think they're doing a good job. That's a huge gap, right? And so part of it may be related to like early childhood improving, but part of it is just like I have so little confidence and it went well. And like I'm trying to build it up and like I need to tell someone, right? So
Mm-hmm.
again, just coming from different perspectives on this, it is saying 20 different things and we're hearing 20 different things, whether we are the feminine parent or the masculine parent in this scenario.
Well, and this is, I think, if you are like, if the relationship is sort of, I don't want to offend the other person. Am I getting this right? Like, if there is a lack of self confidence on either part, and I think in parenting, most people are worried, like, am I screwing this up? Are they going to
Sure.
be on a therapy? So I think it is hard to be confident as a parent because we get it wrong so much of the time. I love what this psychologist on a podcast that I had her on last year, and I repeat this so often. She was this just very wise older woman, and she said they've done studies on this. The best parents get it right only 30% of the time. So she said, so what does that mean? It means 70% of the time you're completely fucking it up. But when you learn how to repair, right? Like the beauty really lies in the repair after we've had when things have gone sideways and then we come back and then we are able to have these vulnerable repairing conversations. It's not the 30% of the time that you're just nailing it. So she was like, so everybody can just like take a breath and stop with the perfectionism. She had different language for it, but that's how I interpreted it. And I think it has been so freeing for so many parents to hear that. Like the perfectionism is not helpful, and we don't have to keep measuring ourselves according to that standard. But what I was going to say is I think in a relationship where, like we can joke and say, are you refolding all the underwear that I, and he's like, well, I like it. And the truth is that our cleaning woman, he's like, but Wendy folds it in these like thirds. And I looked and I really like how she folds it. So I just learned how to fold it like that too. Like basically saying you don't fold it as good as Wendy. And I'm like, that's fair. I Okay, great. And I'm not a great folder. But that's a relationship where I'm working on my self-awareness. I understand who I'm married to. We've also been married for almost 30 years. So like we really know each other, right? But when you're at the younger stages of your relationship, you're getting to know each other. And so, you know, like, oh, I have a sensitive partner. I don't want to hurt their feelings, maybe. And so I think that, that's where productive conversations can be helpful, when you start to train yourself. Okay, I noticed this morning it was meltdown after meltdown after meltdown, or almost meltdowns. And I know a better way of doing this, but I don't want to offend her. How do I bring this up to her so that I can be a part of the morning, so that we can sort of do some of the things that I learned without offending her? And so there is some strategy. It's just like,
For
it's
sure.
like it's a little bit of a negotiation. So there is some strategy involved. Once you are sort of past that point, then I think it's much simpler to be like, oh my God, I'm so proud of myself. I did amazing. Those 2 weeks with the kids, you would have been so proud. You should have had hidden cameras. I was nailing it. They were happy. They were skipping off to school. Like, they were eating things that I was putting in front of them that they've never eaten before. And at that point, it's like, I mean, because if I think back to myself, I'm like, if I got back in town, and heard how much Scott had been nailing it, like, nothing would make me happier. I'd be like, this is amazing news, right? So I do think that that comes, but I think when your intuition is telling you that chances are she's going to say, really? Well, good. Yeah, 2 weeks. That lucky. Why don't you
Yeah,
try hundreds of weeks,
for
and
sure.
let's see,
I
right?
mean, I 100% agree with you. The challenge is you're talking about deeply emotionally intelligent conversations where both partners have been trained to some extent to understand, like, how to not just read one another, but to approach, like, a conversation that involves potentially hurting someone if it's not presented the right way, with all the care in the world. And again, like, and the method that you talk about is spot on. Um, I just don't always know that the situation presents itself well enough, or that the father knows how to do it, or that the mother knows how to do it necessarily. And then there's so many other things working against us. So when you were saying that thing about, we only get it right a third of the time, or even less, 30% of the time, I was thinking to one of the assumptions that holds so many dads back is this idea, like, that fatherhood is supposed to just happen naturally, right? And I know a lot of mothers feel this way too. It's like this slap in the face where, like, oh my God, no, being a good mother is all about, like, learning and growing and training. For dads, the timeline to recognizing that, to not feeling shame about that, and then to actively go work and become a better dad, I feel is a bit of a longer timeline, unfortunately, than it is for moms. For a lot of logical reasons, not the least of which is what you just mentioned, is that the mom is like owning more of the parenting early on. And so as a result, we've got so many different insecurities running through us on both sides. And so I want to be able to get through all of those to have this beautiful, productive conversation. And the question is that something that, you know, can we do that simply by explaining to everyone listening, like, here's the best approach? Or is there like a quicker hack that we can do in the short term, which is really just like to an empathy hack, where we really try to um, get each parent to to verbalize what we think the other parent is experiencing in that moment, and then have a conversation just simply about that, like, hey, I saw you just got back. I'm imagining you might be feeling these three things. Can you tell me if they're right? And they can say the same thing. Hey, I see how our son is, like, connecting with you since I've been gone. I imagine you feeling these three things. Is that right? And then that makes the next conversation even easier, because I love the more in-depth techniques I'm just concerned that like a lot of the dads that are listening are not going to dive into them so quickly without a bit more thought.
Yeah, that's, I will say that I mostly coach moms and a few super cool dads. But the interesting thing has been I have found the coaching of dads to be a little bit simpler. Um,
Tell me what that means.
like it's almost like and I know this is again stereotyping. It's like I think men are so solution oriented, that it's like so often when and I've had a lot of questioner dads. I give this assessment, and it sort of identifies, um, when you're faced with a challenge, how do you typically go about solving that challenge? Like, what is your tendency? And this was based on Gretchen Rubin's work, The Four Tendencies. So questioners are skeptics, and I've had a lot of questioner dads that come in and they're just like, it's like, yeah, convince me of it. Like, and they and a lot of really smart dads I've had, for whatever reason, a lot of doctors and lawyers. And while I mostly coach the moms, the dads will pop in when, the mom is first learning some new tools and she's growing her sea legs, and a lot of the time it's not going well. So he comes in and he's like, "What is this new approach? This is bullshit." And so I'll say, like, tell me, give it to me. I want to hear all the things. And so we'll kind of go and I'll explain, like, the behind the scenes, the science behind it, the communication tools. And when I make a compelling argument, they're like, got it. That makes sense. And it's been unbelievable to me. I mean, I'm thinking about this one dad in particular who now is my friend years later. He was such a pain in the ass at the beginning. He was like, I don't understand. I grew up and this is how it was, and they can't get away with, and this is ridiculous. And we just, I was just like, great questions. This is what we know. Here's the science behind it. This is what I've seen. Here's an example. And once he got it, he has changed the way he practices medicine.
Mm.
I mean, it's been like, I'm constantly saying to him, it is unbelievable to me how strong of a pack leader you are, not even just in your family, but also all these people that you take care of on a regular basis that come into your practice. It's amazing to me. And so I have seen dads be so coachable that, especially ambitious, smart, really with it guy. It's like, oh, that actually makes sense. So if you think about the productive conversation and what I just offered, you have the conversation out of the moment
Yeah.
and you've strategized a little bit, and you start to think, okay, what do I want to accomplish? Well, I want to accomplish more, smoother mornings, just like we
Mhm.
had when she was out of town. And I don't want to hurt her feelings or make her feel like I'm stepping on her toes. How do I approach this? And so if you think of it like a business negotiation, my productive conversation method, which that very first part, which is seeing the other person's perspective first and foremost and communicating it, it's the exact same thing from the book Never Split the Difference.
Mm.
Um, that a lot of people are familiar with, that business negotiation book by Chris Voss. In fact, years ago, I was somebody kind of accused me of plagiarizing him. I hadn't even read his book yet, but then I had to go and read it. And it is, I mean, it's like, okay, I wasn't the first person to come up with this. Lots of
Yeah.
people have come up with this, because when you see the other person's perspective and you know what it is you want to accomplish, the other person is not expecting for you to see their perspective. It actually is a pattern disruption. It sort of throws them for a loop when somebody comes and they're like, I was thinking about it. And, you know, you've been carrying all these mornings, and I've just been unaware of all the, like, your wife is not expecting you to come at her with that. Nobody is ever expecting you to just come at a conversation. So when we start to practice this, and especially if you have little kids with each other, with our partners, and we are working on our marriage in that way, let me tell you, this is your training ground for how you will speak to your kids, especially when they become teenagers. And it is a ninja skill. And not only will you use this with your family, you'll use this in your business relationships. I mean, it is a negotiation tactic. You know, I think Chris Voss kind of teaches it a little bit in a manipulative way. So I'm like, and for me, it's not manipulative. It's, we want to have healthy, beautiful relationships with the people we love the most in the world. So why wouldn't we learn the most effective communication tools and
Yeah.
work like hell to ingrain them in our minds?
Yeah. So I totally agree. And I'm just thinking about first when you were talking about like the dads are the skeptic. I was 100% nodding my head. Like I would come in totally skeptical. You would explain it to me. And then after I got it, I would definitely be the same. And I'm not sure. I'm thinking
Doing,
now.
you would just do it, right? You would be like, that makes sense. I'm doing that.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
need to be, but I don't necessarily think that's just a masculine thing. I mean, I coach leaders and I'm thinking of like these cohorts of leaders that I have. And it's always different each year. There's one or two out of say 20 that are extremely difficult. And it's never just the men or just the women. It's always a mix. And there's just something about like not just their skepticism is high, but their defensiveness is high, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not going to learn some new shit unless I know that this is worth my time. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes a little effort and you get through to them. And then when the wall comes down, though, it comes down doubly fast, right? And they're the people that end up being like the ones absorbing more of your teaching more than anyone else. I'm also thinking when you're explaining that the conversations at least that I'm having with dads because there's often friction with their partners doing more of the work. Like they tend to know what they need to say to initiate it, but I see less evidence in anecdotal conversations that the moms are doing the same back. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is because I don't think they actually know what's going on in us as the dads, right? Like, again, going back to this example of the father having a wonderful experience taking care of their child for the 2 weeks, right? There's so much different stuff going on for the dad, right? He's like experiencing this like self confidence boost that like he was probably either like might have felt shame beforehand or at the very least unspoken like concern about how he would or does perform as a father. Like you don't necessarily know, too many women don't know how much shame dads are carrying around like their lack of confidence in fatherhood. The questions that we have that we don't actually go to talk to anyone about in relation to like what worries us as dads, which are often very different worries than moms have. And so I think there's a lot to be learned, and this is why you and I are having this conversation on both ends, like what's going through our minds, and it also remind me of just this experience I had with my son, and we were talking about this topic a little bit earlier, which is our kids don't inherit our words, they inherit our actions. And my 5-year old a couple of weeks ago like just plain old clocked his 8-year-old brother in the face, and I watched it, and I like was like, I can't believe you just hit your brother in the face. And he proceeded to just deny it, like flat out deny it for like 5 minutes. No, he had a mini temper tantrum, he was just denying it, and I'm sitting there, I mean, I witnessed it. And I was thinking to myself, like obviously, if I raise my voice, nothing is going to come of this. So the best way I thought of engaging in this experience with him was to be like, okay, I'm just going to be totally calm. And I'm not going to give in to his temper tantrum, but I'm going to say, look, I did see you do it. And then he kept crying and he kept crying. And then eventually, when he was done with that, then we could have the conversation about it. But what I realized, what he was going to be learning from that was how I responded with my body, right? And not just my words, where I wasn't getting visibly upset, I wasn't screaming, I was just being calm because that's what I wanted
But what
him
were you
to.
thinking? What were you
I
thinking
want
that
to kill
allowed you?
him is
You
what I
were?
was thinking. Of
Yeah.
course, I was thinking that. But then I was thinking, and I think this goes to where I was trying to go with this, is he gave such wonderful signals. The signals that it didn't matter what I said or did, nothing was going to get through to him. And those signals were the denying what I watched in front of him. Those signals were the temper tantrum. Every time, even in a kind voice, I said, I saw you hit your brother, right? So when I took in that information, it was obvious that there was no learning that was going to take place. And so I thought to myself, what do I want to teach here? So, but first, actually, to be honest, I thought to myself, how am I going to get over being so pissed? And so I spent like 90 seconds just basically ignoring him and hugging his brother. And I talked to a child psychologist. I interviewed him on my podcast the other day, and I was like, "Am I doing the right thing? Like when I am ready to lose it, like instead of losing it, I just sort of like walk away from my kids, like kind of get out of the space." For 90 seconds. And I'm like, I'm wondering what they're thinking. Like, is this a horrible thing? And he's like, instead of wondering what they're thinking when you're doing that, think to yourself what you're avoiding by doing that. Like you're avoiding like screaming, you're avoiding all this like lack of connection, all this stuff. They're just maybe going to be a little confused for a couple minutes, but at the end you're going to turn that into great connection. And so like that really stuck with me. But the reason I talk about this is again like trying to suss out like how do I educate my child without words? Like, how do I do it through my actions, right? How do I show him what I want him to experience, and going forward without like losing it myself? And I am going through all these thoughts whenever I'm engaging with my kids, and I know a lot of dads are, but the challenge is just like with moms, that we have like these amygdala reactions, right? And then the same is going to be true when it's a husband and a wife talking about their experiences over the same like um, parenting situations. And hopefully we learn over time how to deal with our partners on it, and get a little better on it. But what I've experienced so far is like, while the moms have incredible empathy, they're not necessarily imagining as much going on inside our heads as I think I've seen in all the dads that I've talked to. And I just want to express that, like, because because we are sophisticated, we aren't simple, which was actually the word you used, which is not offensive at all. But it's just like, especially if we're, leaders in the work we do, we have a level of sophistication in how we empathize and engage at work. At home, that doesn't always happen because there's emotion involved. But I want everyone to know, like, these dads are processing a lot of ideas about how to improve, even when they fail, just like moms are.
No, I agree. I don't think any human being is simple. I think coaching dads
Ah, fair
is
enough.
simpler. I think coaching dads, I just think that, look, I think it's hard to be female and to grow up female. And especially now, what I see with women, all of a sudden they're in this really important leadership position, but most women have been conditioned their whole lives to not think like leaders, to not communicate like leaders, to not have a tone that is assertive like a leader tends to have, to say things in a sing-songy voice and to say okay on the end of something that is actually not a
Yeah.
request. And so a lot of what I'm doing with women is helping them to see where that faulty conditioning exists. And
Mm,
what I found is that, with men, there's a lot of other faulty conditioning, like,
sure.
like around vulnerability and intimacy and things that every human being deserves and needs. Um, but the simpler part is when dads are stepping into that leadership position. Well, you were taught to be assertive, even, and like, so going from aggressive to assertive, because a lot of men, it was like, no, man up, be aggressive. So going from aggressive to assertive, which to me is the goal of pack leadership, it's firm and loving. And a lot of times we need to say things in an not in an aggressive tone. We don't need to be assholes, but assertive. Like, people know we mean business. And it's a heavier lift for women, for the typical female, to go from that sort of passive camp counselor mommy, wants to be really nice, wants to be the sweet one, to assertive versus
Totally.
the male conditioning, right?
And I think what our challenge is what the kids need most is where women have been better conditioned than us, which is we don't try to solution everything, right? That we
Mm-hmm.
just listen, right?
Right.
And we fail at that horribly,
We do
particularly at
too.
home.
Please trust me, as a fixer in recovery who quite often relapses. It's just when the stakes are so high, when you care so much, it's hard not to go into solutions. Um, but
Yeah.
what I also noticed about your story is, that's why I asked, well, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? And the part that there was a couple of parts that I want to circle back to. The part that you asked the psychologist, is it okay that I disengage basically for 90 seconds, right? And so, that's what the science tells us. It takes 90 seconds for an
Yep.
emotion to move through your body. Most of us don't know how to do that. Um, and it's miraculous when you not only start doing it, but also when you see your kids do it. I have a couple of stories, especially with my
Mm.
youngest child, and I was just he's almost 20, and I was just telling him the other day that I was, because my kids don't hear my stories that I used to teach with. I mean, if they wanted to, they could, and sometimes they do. But I said no. We were talking about something, and he was talking about something that he was feeling, and I said, it's what you are willing to feel. That is a skill that a lot of people don't have. And he was like, what do you mean? And I said, I talk about this, how I had heard for years that it takes 90 seconds, but for an emotion to move through you. But I witnessed it with you. And I'll never forget. He was like, when? I was like, a couple of times. And I said, the first time I was really aware of it was remember when I told you couldn't take your phone on the bus when you were going to camp? And you were like, everyone else is going to have their phone. And he was about 13, which nowadays kids don't even have. A lot of kids aren't even having phones at 13, but back then it seemed like everyone did. And I said, no, we're going to be for a whole month phone free. So, make sure you have your, a book and whatever. He's like, what am I going to do? And he was freaking out. And I said, I remember I stayed in your room. I watched you go lay on your bed. I watched your eyes, and now I've done enough therapy that I know that there's a lot in the eyes. I watched his eyes look up to the corner of the room. I saw his chest go up and down. And I'm telling you, it was 90 seconds. And I went and sat on his bed and I said, tell me. And he said, it's fine. And I said,
Mm.
you can be mad at me. I understand. Like, it's hard to be the only one. It's totally legit. If you're mad at me, you can tell me. He's like, it's fine. I'll just take a book. And it had moved through him. And I said, and what that looked like was a year and a half later, our family dog that they had grown up with died in this whole tragic way. She drowned, and she was
Mm.
old, but she drowned. And we were all so sad that night. And my husband was really worried that one of the kids was going to blame themselves because, she got left outside and she fell in the pool, and
Mm.
she had a seizure or something. She was almost 15. And he was trying to offset anybody blaming themselves. And so he was like, oh, I'm the one who let her out. I came home from work. I put her out there. It wasn't even true, but he was like really worried. And Corey looked at him and he said, Dad, our dog died. Our family member died. Can't we just all be sad? Why do we need to
Mm.
blame anyone?
Wow.
And he was like, really? I said that? And I said, yeah, you said it, because it's like, you were like, I'm not scared of sadness. We should feel sad right now. Can't we just be sad? We don't have to, skirt over the sadness and go to blame.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Which,
love that. Yeah.
yeah, which is so beautiful. So I would say when you are modeling, when you're about to lose it, for any of the I'm not even talking about you, but when anybody's about to lose it, and you have the impulse control to disengage and walk away. And like a lot of times it's change your environment, change your state. You might walk outside, you might put your head between your legs, you might do what I call the sniff, sniff, slow breath, which supposedly goes
Yeah.
straight to the vagus nerve, where you sniff in and then you sniff in a little bit more at the top and you hold it and then you slow exhale. You might do that. You might go over, wash your hands, and just notice your palms as you feel the soapy warm water. Okay, so those are all just mindfulness
Yeah.
practices that calm and regulate your nervous system. And then you go back over to your kids. What you just modeled was impulse control, self regulation, boundaries, right? I am going to go and take care of myself and calm my own body down. I'm not going to explain it. I'm not going to ask for permission from anyone. I'm just going to go and do what needs to be done. And then you come back to your kids. And if they're like, why did you leave so quickly? Dad, we were in the middle of a conversation. Why? I I was starting to get heated. I needed to go and just I didn't want to say something or come across scary. So I just needed to go and just calm my body down for a minute. Tell me, what did you want to tell me, bud?
No, that was
Right?
exactly that last part, right? Where to go back in and explain exactly what you did is huge because that's modeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the piece that is so much more powerful than the words is they see what you're doing, but they don't necessarily understand it. So then you explain it a bit more. And that happened a second time because this past weekend also we were on a bike ride and I'm in front of my kids and I turn around and I see one swerving into the other, and I immediately stopped and I said, absolutely not. That this is a safety issue. You are not allowed to hit each other on the bikes. They then start to say, you told us to tell you if you're raising your voice at us and you're raising your voice at us. And I was like, yes, because I need to be stern. This was about
Yeah.
being safe. And then they kept going. And so I was getting frustrated. And so because they were, smarter than they needed to be, right? Because I have also asked my boys, by the way, I say, Daddy is working on his own emotional self-regulation and his own temper. So I want you to help me. If I don't notice that my tone is changing, I want you to tell me. And that's been helpful until it's not.
Right.
But I still encourage everyone to do it. But the not is when it is required that I raise my voice, they will still tell me not
Yeah.
to raise my voice, and then I have to explain why, and then they still push back, and it creates more frustration. And that's in this scenario where I got off my bike, I went and sat down on a bench. I waited about 90 seconds. They tried to talk to me and I just ignored them. And when I came back to them, I told them what I did and they didn't really say anything, but we'll see how it models itself in the future. But these things these things have taken a lot of time to practice, right?
It's practice, and look, I do think it's like the story that you told about seeing the younger one clock the older one.
Yeah.
This is where I think it can be helpful sometimes just to like know a thing that we didn't know before. Like I wouldn't have known this if I hadn't learned it years ago, which is little kids create their own reality. So often parents
So do
think,
adults.
yeah, well, we do. But parents think your kid is bold-faced lying. Like, how could that scenario? Like, I saw it with my own eyes. But in that moment, and I remember when I was first learning it, it was like a little 4-year-old with red popsicle all over the face, and the mom was trying to wipe it, and she was like, "You have red popsicle all over your face," and she's like, the little kid's like, "No, I don't. No, I
Yeah.
don't." She didn't want to stop in that moment. She didn't want to get her face wiped. She didn't want to feel probably the sensation of the cold washcloth, whatever it is. So they create their own reality. It doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to circle back and have the
Yes.
conversation, right? But in that moment, he was totally dysregulated. Something was not okay with him. He needed to know, he needed his brother to know how he was feeling on the inside. And he didn't have the words to express it in that moment. And so, as 5-year-olds sometimes do, he took matters into his own hands and his body took over, and he hits his brother, right? And so he's still dysregulated. In that moment, you're
Hmm.
like, I saw it. But he goes into this trance of, I didn't do it. No, I didn't. Right. And then a lot of times they'll double down. And it's because they're dysregulated, we're dysregulated, nothing's getting accomplished. But the bottom line is that he's really not bold-faced lying like an adult would be, because we just have a different cognitive ability, right?
Yeah.
That 5-year-old in that moment, they literally are like, "No, I didn't. No, I didn't." And they're believing, "No, I didn't. No, I didn't." And so it's just going to go in circles until, and so the other thing I wanted to say is, well, as far as that, knowing that little kids create their own reality, and we will circle back to it, and we will talk about what was going on underneath behind the hit, and we will discuss that, and how this family has to be a safe zone for everyone. That's a non-negotiable. There's no violence, period, end of story. So we will get our chance to double down on that. But in the meantime, I think, explaining, going to your other son and hugging him. I just wanted to kind of pinpoint that.
Oh, yeah.
So that is what I teach as step one in my sibling fighting tool.
Oh.
So what you did intuitively, so I just want to kind of pause for applause for you on that. What
Thank you.
you did intuitively was you went to the injured party. You put your bandwidth and your energy on the child that was actually hurt. Most of the time, we put our bandwidth and our energy on the aggressor, on the hurter, instead of the one who was injured. And so when we put our energy on the aggressor, what we focus on grows. We get more of the hurting behavior. When we put our bandwidth on the injured party and on the healing, the hugging, the healing, we get more of that. So you handled that situation beautifully by going and hugging your child who had just gotten hit.
I mean, it's interesting. Thank you. And I love that feedback because part of it was a little bit of self-preservation. Like
Yeah.
it was the way to avoid getting angry at my mini Mike Tyson. And the other thing that I was thinking about while you were saying that is when I teach how to give feedback to leaders all the time, one of the first things I teach is you have to ask the person, is now a good time to give you some feedback, as the first thing you do. And without a doubt, everyone tries to push back on that. They're like, wait a minute. Like, what if they say no? Or wait a minute, like it's important that I give them this feedback. And I always have to bring it back to kids as the example. I was like, those times when you're trying to deal with a toddler having a temper tantrum, like it doesn't matter what you say, they're not going to hear you. Like it's still true about adults. We're not having a temper tantrum, but if you give feedback in a surprise way, it's going to go right to their amygdala and it is not going to be absorbed in the way that you want it to be absorbed. And then they'll say, well, what if they say no? What am I supposed to do? Well, then you ask for when is a good time to give you some feedback. And just by doing that, when you have the conversation, it'll actually be one where they are able to hear it with their prefrontal cortex. And it is just amazing. Like we have to teach this at all ages to adults as leaders and to ourselves as parents with our kids. But it is such an important lesson to learn. And I think I wrote about it in another article. That same son, for like 3 weeks, started putting his hands over his ears when I was trying to tell him something important. And I was like, oh my God, what is this? I'm going to have to like do some research and figure out what the hell this is. And I was actually coaching another adult when it hit me. I was like, oh my God, no. He's giving me the perfect signal that no adults or older kids give me, which is I'm not going to listen to anything you're saying right now. And that was a blessing, not like a challenge.
I'm
And
not
so,
open for feedback. Right.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not open for and unfortunately, to be honest, it is unfortunate he stopped doing that. So now I have to look at, more subtle signals when he's not open for feedback. But we all have our tells. And it's just so important that we figure these out. Yeah.
Well, and I think, look, if we tie back the productive conversation with the spouse, right? And the productive conversation with your son who clocked his brother, and and that important skill of sort of reading the room and timing, and are you open for feedback? um I don't think anyone is truly able to see someone else's perspective unless they feel that their perspective has been seen first.
Mm, totally.
So I don't think that the dad can approach a conversation with the mom in that sort of strategic, really productive way unless he feels, and it might just be him celebrating himself.
Mm-hmm.
I like, I'm kind of a rock star. The two, she got to go on the trip. She didn't have to worry about a thing. I was a really good dad these 2 weeks. I rocked it, and like I haven't always been the most hands on dad, maybe, but for these 2 weeks, I stepped up and I am that kind of person. Maybe I don't always show up consistently in things that I do, but I am the kind of friend who always comes through, like take, and I think it's a hard thing to do when maybe there is some low self-confidence or secretly some low self-worth, but like taking the time and practicing the skill of really acknowledging this is what I feel proud of. Like I got a text from my, again, almost 20-year-old son. He did this thing last night and he had to speak in front of 300 girls. And his final text was, I feel really proud of myself. And I said, as you should. As you should. You did a really brave and awesome thing. Public speaking is, he said, it was really nerve wracking. It was scary. And he got up in front of 300, college women and did a little 3-minute thing. And he felt really proud of himself. So what I want to say to all the dads that are listening is, it might sound super corny and you don't have to tell anyone else that you're doing it, but please take time to celebrate the things that you're doing with your kids that you actually feel really proud of and good about. Because by doing that and practicing that skill, you are going to be much better at being able to approach conversations productively and see other people's perspectives. And it's the same thing with our kids. the kid who clocked his brother, and when you circle back, right, you're going to see his perspective by applying positive intent. You're going to say something that's, it's not like you. You're a sweet and loving boy. And I know there must have been something else going on that I didn't see. So it's basically sending him the message, yeah, it was a screw up, but you're not a screw up. So when you approach the conversation, like I'm on your team. I'm not going to excuse your behavior, but I see you beyond this behavior. And it's going to be a productive conversation when you start to approach it like that.
I love that advice. I mean, that's the type of advice I use in coaching. And I really didn't think about how vital it would be for a dad to also do that just directly to themselves, because we don't celebrate our wins. We don't celebrate our wins as leaders at work, and we don't celebrate them at home. We move on to the next challenge too quickly. And so, yeah, sometimes it's just giving yourself the credit, and that opens your up to more connection and empathy for the conversation that you need to have with your spouse.
I
That
love
makes a
it.
lot of sense. Yeah.
I
Thank you for
love it.
sharing.
Well, okay. I mean, obviously, this is why we're going to have an ongoing series, because we could have these conversations on and on and on. And it's late at night for you in Spain, so I won't keep you any longer. I've loved this conversation. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for engaging. It was awesome.
Thanks for listening today, guys. I hope you picked up some tips, tools, maybe some baby steps for creating more balance and boundaries in your life. And I just wanted to let you know, if you want to continue moving the needle forward in creating this for yourself, having a happier household, I want you to go to my website and check out mastermindparenting.com. We have 3 beginning programs, and if you need some accountability and more support, then please look for the one that would be a good fit for you. And as always, we're on all the social channels under Mastermind Parenting. On Instagram, it's mastermind_parenting. And, periodically I do pop up on different Instagram lives, Facebook lives, where I give you teaching and coaching, and I love engaging with you live to help you help your strong-willed kids so that they can feel better, because when they feel better, they do better. And I love, love, love getting to know you guys. So thanks for listening. If you like this podcast, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Super, super appreciative.